5 Forbidden Truths Men Hide in Silence. Carl Jung, have you ever wondered why some men speak less when the truth is most needed? Why their silences feel heavier than words? Why they conceal entire worlds behind a calm face or a steady gaze? Carl Jung once warned that what is not brought to consciousness rules us from the shadows. A man's silence is never just absence of words. It is the fortress of his ego, the veil covering what he cannot bear to reveal, even to himself. The first forbidden truth is that his silence often masks fear. To the untrained eye, he appears composed, confident, perhaps even indifferent. Yet behind that silence lies the terror of inadequacy, the haunting suspicion that he is not enough. Jung understood that the masculine ego thrives on validation, on proof of worth delivered through achievement, conquest, or recognition. But, when he doubts his power to sustain these illusions, silence becomes his shield. He hides the trembling child within, the boy who still aches for approval, terrified that if he speaks his fragility will be exposed. You may have felt this when a man withdraws in moments of intimacy, not because he doesn't care, but because caring reveals his vulnerability. The second forbidden truth is that his silence conceals desire that feels dangerous. Men are often taught to fear their own depth of longing, to disguise obsession as control, to dress vulnerability as dominance. And so when desire overwhelms him, he buries it beneath stoic restraint. Yet silence is rarely neutral. Beneath it burns the fire of need, the craving for touch, for validation, for the woman who unsettles him simply by being out of reach. That fire is forbidden because it threatens to expose dependence. Desire is to admit that he is no longer sovereign, that he hungers for what he cannot command, and so he hides it, pretending distance where there is obsession, calm where there is storm. The third forbidden truth hidden in silence is resentment. When a man feels unseen, unacknowledged, or powerless, he may not rage openly. Instead, his silence thickens, turning into a subtle form of punishment. He withholds not only words but presence, starving the relationship of connection. Jung would call this a projection of shadow, resentment denied in the conscious mind but expressed through behavior. His silence says what his pride refuses to. I feel small in your presence. I resent that you have a power over me that I cannot control. This resentment is rarely spoken because it risks shame, yet it leaks through the cracks, poisoning intimacy in ways words never could. The fourth forbidden truth is regret. Few things haunt a man more than what he did not say. The moments where silence replaced honesty, where pride silenced tenderness. He may never confess it, but silence often conceals the weight of missed chances. Apologies never given, affection never expressed, vulnerability never shared. At night, in solitude, this regret echoes loudly. He replays conversations that could have saved what was lost, imagines alternate paths where he dared to be open. Yet by day he remains silent, unwilling to admit that his own pride carved the distance he now mourns. The fifth and perhaps deepest forbidden truth hidden in silence is longing for transformation. Men fear collapse, yet silence often reveals their unconscious yearning for it. Within the quiet is a hidden hope that something will break the dam and force them into authenticity. He does not speak it, but his silence whispers, I want to be free of this armor. I want to face myself, but I don't know how. Jung described individuation as the process of integrating shadow into wholeness. A man's silence often signals that this process has begun, though he may resist it fiercely. It is forbidden because it means surrender, the collapse of illusions, the death of the ego as he has known it. For the woman who encounters this silence, the experience is both haunting and confusing. You may feel rejected, punished, unseen. Yet understand this. His silence is rarely about you. It is the battlefield of his own psyche, the place where shadows wrestle with the ego. The challenge is whether he will face the truths buried there, or whether he will continue to conceal them until they destroy the intimacy he longs for but cannot sustain. In silence, you are not only hearing absence, you are witnessing the echo of centuries of conditioning, the masculine demand for invulnerability, the cultural script that taught men to hide fear, desire, resentment, regret, and transformation behind stillness. But every silence is a doorway. For him, it is the doorway to shadow work. For you, it is the invitation to recognize that his truths, though forbidden, were never yours to carry. His silence does not end when the conversation stops. It lingers like a phantom, shaping the atmosphere around him. Jung knew that silence is never empty. It is loaded with the unconscious. Every pause, every withdrawal, every word left unsaid carries a shadow far larger than what the ear can detect. A man may not realize it himself, but when he withdraws into quietness, he is stepping into a realm where his deepest fears and desires fight for dominance. What seems like control is often inner chaos, and what appears indifferent is often unbearable longing. For centuries, men have been trained to wear silence like armor. Stoicism, when misunderstood, becomes suppression rather than discipline. Seneca spoke of inner calm as freedom, but many men mistake repression for mastery. Their silence becomes a performance of strength, hiding storms they dare not name. Yet beneath the calm exterior, desire claws at the walls of their psyche. Regret circles endlessly. Resentment poisons the heart, and fear trembles like a child abandoned. They call it composure, but in truth it is exile. Exile from their own emotions. For the woman, this exile becomes a puzzle. You feel the weight of what is unsaid, the tension that crackles beneath his stillness. You know intuitively that silence is not emptiness. It is a language all its own. His silence tells you he is afraid of your power, unsettled by your independence, haunted by the possibility that your absence would shatter him. Yet he will not admit it, for admission would strip him bare. He would rather risk distance than surrender the illusion of control, and so he hides behind the only shield he knows: silence. But silence is not a stable shield. It corrodes from within. Jung described the shadow as everything the ego refuses to acknowledge. In a man's silence, the shadow thrives. Every unspoken word becomes a stone in the fortress until the weight grows unbearable. When he can no longer carry it, the silence collapses into outbursts of anger, desperation, or obsession. Have you ever seen a man rage suddenly after weeks of detachment, or chase frantically after pretending not to care? That eruption is not born in the moment. It is the breaking of silence's dam, the unconscious flooding through. This is why a woman's detachment terrifies him so deeply. When you choose silence, it mirrors his own. But while his silence is avoidance, yours is power. Yours is the conscious reclaiming of energy, the refusal to bleed out in explanations and justifications. He senses the difference instinctively. His silence hides, your silence reveals. His silence conceals weakness. Yours embodies strength. To him, this is unbearable. He cannot battle silence with arguments, cannot dominate it with pride. All he can do is confront what lies within himself or run from it, and so he oscillates. One moment he convinces himself he does not care. The next he feels the ache of obsession, replaying your absence like a song he cannot escape. He longs for your voice, not because of its sound, but because it once shielded him from the abyss of his own thoughts. He resents your silence because it starves the ego that fed on your attention. But he also desires it, for it awakens a mystery that he cannot possess. In this paradox, he is torn open. What he does not tell you, and perhaps cannot tell himself, is that your silence forces him to confront truths he has buried for years. It reveals the boy who never learned to soothe himself, the man who equated control with love, the soul that has mistaken possession for intimacy. Jung would say this is his chance for individuation, the painful but necessary process of integrating shadow into wholeness. But individuation demands courage, and courage is rare. Many men will resist, chasing distraction instead of depth. They will try to drown out the silence with noise, with validation, with conquest. Yet no matter how far they run, silence follows, because silence lives within them. For you, the silence carries a different meaning. It is no longer about him. It is about yourself. It is the moment you step into your sovereignty, reclaiming the fragments of energy once poured into his validation. Silence becomes your initiation, your reminder that power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it withdraws, Sometimes it simply is. And in that stillness, you are no longer tethered to his projections. You are whole unto yourself. This is why silence is both forbidden and sacred. Forbidden, because it dismantles illusions and shatters the scaffolding of his ego. Sacred, because it restores you to yourself, reminding you that the most magnetic presence comes not from chasing, but from standing in stillness. Men may call it dangerous, manipulative, or cruel. But the truth is simpler. Silence is sovereignty. And sovereignty cannot be explained to those who fear it. It can only be embodied. Type continue to receive the next part. Type continue to receive the next part. His silence deepens with time, and what began as a wall becomes a labyrinth. Within it he is both prisoner and warden, pacing corridors built from unspoken words, swallowed feelings, and fears he refuses to name. To those around him, he may appear calm, even detached, but beneath the surface his psyche grows restless. Jung would say that the unconscious never sleeps. It presses from below, demanding recognition. And when a man buries too much within silence, it begins to seep out through dreams, obsessions, and sudden bursts of emotion that seem to come from nowhere. The forbidden truths he hides there are not dormant. They are alive, breathing, pulsing with intensity. Fear transforms into defensiveness. Desire, suppressed too long, twists into obsession. Resentment hardens into bitterness. Regret gnaws like an unseen parasite. Even the longing for transformation becomes distorted, surfacing as reckless decisions or sudden withdrawals. Silence does not kill these truths. It incubates them until they demand expression. And when they emerge, they rarely emerge gently. This is why silence feels so suffocating in relationships. You sense that something unspoken lingers between you, an invisible presence shaping every exchange. You may wonder if you are imagining it, but you are not. Human intuition knows when energy has shifted. His silence is not emptiness. It is weight. It says what his pride will not. I am afraid, I am angry, I am undone by you, I am longing for something I cannot admit. And though he hides behind stillness, his body betrays him. The restless tapping of fingers, the distant gaze, the sudden distraction, each movement is a fragment of the shadow speaking in place of his words. For the woman, silence becomes revelation. You begin to see that what he hides has little to do with you and everything to do with him. His silence is not your failure to inspire him to speak, nor is it proof of your inadequacy. It is his inability to confront himself. Jung taught that projections fall away when they are withdrawn, and when a man's projection collapses, he must face the raw truth. The woman before him is not his savior, nor his mother, nor his mirror. She is sovereign. If he cannot handle that sovereignty, he retreats into silence because silence feels safer than honesty. But sovereignty in a woman is magnetic precisely because it cannot be controlled. When you step into silence consciously, you embody a force that unsettles him. He cannot decode it, cannot dominate it, cannot dismiss it. Your silence is not absence. It is presence sharpened into clarity. It tells him without words, I will not carry your shadow for you. I will not fill the hollowness you refuse to face. If you want intimacy, you must meet me whole. And this message, though never spoken, pierces deeper than any accusation. This is why men often return obsessively to the memory of the woman who went silent. He may replace her with others, drown himself in noise, but the echo of her detachment haunts him. Not because she punished him, but because she forced him to confront the abyss within himself. He cannot forget her because forgetting her would mean forgetting the lesson she carried, that his ego was never as solid as he believed. In his regret, he may try to reclaim her presence with words of apology, promises of change, or even displays of rage. Yet these attempts often reveal the very truths he tried to conceal. Rage uncovers fear. Apology reveals regret. Promises expose longing for transformation. His silence, once an armor, crumbles under the pressure of its own weight. And if he has courage, he will see this collapse not as failure, but as initiation. For silence, when faced honestly, can become sacred ground. It strips away illusions, forcing both man and woman to stand without masks. It reveals the shadow and demands integration. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the inner citadel is the fortress no one can breach. In a woman's silence, she steps into this citadel, untouchable, radiant in self-possession. In a man's silence, he is invited to enter his own citadel, but only if he dares to stop hiding and confront the forbidden truths within. Here lies the paradox. Silence terrifies because it holds power. It dismantles the false, starves the ego, awakens the unconscious. And yet it is only through silence that the deepest transformation becomes possible. For him, it may lead to collapse or awakening. For her, it becomes the path of reclamation. In the end, silence is not the absence of communication. It is communication at its most raw, most dangerous, most divine. The silence becomes a mirror, and in that reflection, the truth can no longer be denied. His carefully crafted image, polished, through charm, achievement, or control, begins to fracture. Jung reminded us that the persona, the mask worn to face the world, is not the self. It is only the role. Silence strips this mask away. And when the mask falls, what is left is not strength, but fragility, not control, but exposure. A man who built his worth on the gaze of a woman finds himself disoriented when that gaze turns inward. He feels abandoned, but what he truly feels is unseen by himself. To her, his silence once felt like rejection. But as time passes, she begins to perceive it differently. She sees that his silence is a language of fear. He fears vulnerability because it might dissolve the power he pretends to hold. He fears desire because it reveals dependency. He fears resentment because admitting it would mean facing his own shame. He fears regret because it would force him to acknowledge the tenderness he denied. And he fears transformation because it requires the death of his ego. Each fear lives in the hollow between words, in the pauses that stretch too long, in the conversations that never arrive. You may have seen this pattern unfold. He grows restless under your independence. Your stillness unsettles him because it does not orbit his gravity. Your refusal to explain ignites his confusion, even his rage. Why? Because your silence becomes proof that his worth was never sustained by conquest, but by reflection. Without your energy feeding him, his ego falters. He calls it punishment, but it is not. It is revelation. His hunger for your attention exposes how fragile his selfhood has always been. The woman who learns to honor her own silence steps into a deeper archetype. She becomes not the caretaker of his wounds, but the guardian of her own soul. Her silence is not emptiness. It is fullness of self. She embodies the high priestess, veiled and luminous, the eternal mystery that cannot be owned. To him, she becomes both irresistible and terrifying. He longs for her presence because it once shielded him from his own shadow, yet he fears her detachment because it forces him to face that shadow directly. This is why her silence lingers in his mind long after she has left. It was never her voice alone that he desired. It was the protection from himself that her presence once provided. Jung taught that the shadow rejected will rule us. And so in his silence the unspoken truths grow louder. Fear whispers in sleepless nights. Desire burns in fantasies he cannot control. Resentment festers in subtle jabs and cold stares. Regret gnaws at him in the form of what-ifs. And the longing for transformation stalks him like a ghost, reminding him that freedom requires surrender. He may try to silence these truths with distraction, another relationship, another conquest, another ambition, but they follow him. Silence is not escaped, it is carried within. For her, however, silence becomes liberation. No longer does she bleed her energy into his projections. No longer does she explain her worth, soothe his insecurities, or beg to be chosen. She has chosen herself, and in that choice, she is reborn. Her silence becomes her sanctuary, a temple where she remembers the wholeness she once sacrificed. From this sanctuary she emerges radiant, not because she seeks attention but because she no longer needs it. This radiance is the paradox men cannot resolve. The woman who does not chase becomes unforgettable. You, too, can sense the truth of this. When you detach, not in anger but in sovereignty, you embody a magnetism deeper than words. You no longer perform to be loved. You no longer plead to be seen. You no longer justify your existence. Your silence says more than any argument could. I am enough without your validation. And this truth is what terrifies him most, for it leaves him with only two choices: collapse into obsession or rise into transformation. The silence stretches, like a threshold. For him, it is the threshold of shadow work, a painful initiation he may or may not accept. For her, it is the threshold of sovereignty, the sacred moment where she reclaims her life. He may haunt himself with her absence, but she flourishes in her presence. And in this divergence lies the essence of the forbidden truths men hide in silence. They are less about her than they are about himself. Type continue to receive the next part. Type continue to receive the next part. The silence eventually becomes permanent, no longer a pause but a boundary. He wakes each day with the faint ache of what once was, and though he might deny it aloud, he carries her absence like a shadow stitched to his soul. His ego, once inflated by her devotion, lies fractured, and in those fractures lies both torment and possibility. Jung would say that collapse is never final. It is the threshold of transformation. Yet not every man dares to cross. Some cling to illusions, hiding, in distraction, convincing themselves she was cold, cruel, unworthy. But even as they speak those words, their hearts betray them. For no man forgets the woman whose silence revealed him to himself. She, however, moves differently. Her silence has ripened into freedom. She no longer fears solitude because she has learned to companion herself. She no longer craves validation because she has found her worth in the quiet of her own soul. What once felt like loss has become liberation, a return to her essence. She is not harder now, only clearer, softer, but soft like water that bends without breaking, stronger than stone. Her silence is no longer reaction. It is identity. The forbidden truths he once hid remain with him. The fear of inadequacy, the hunger of desire, the poison of resentment, the ache of regret, and the hidden longing for transformation. But whether he integrates them or remains their prisoner is his choice alone. She does not wait for his awakening. She does not carry his shadow. Her silence is not about him. It is about her. And in that shift she becomes untouchable, not because she cannot be reached, but because she can no longer be controlled. This is the lesson his haunting teaches, that love without freedom is bondage, that intimacy without truth is illusion, that silence is never empty but full of meaning. Her silence shows him that what he loved was not her alone, but the reflection she once offered. And now that reflection is gone, leaving him with himself. It is the most terrifying confrontation of all, and the only one that can make him whole. For her, the ending is not collapse but ascension. She no longer defines her worth by whether she is chosen. She no longer bends to soothe what refuses, to heal. She no longer gives herself away in order to be seen. She has returned to herself, and in that return she has found everything she was seeking all along. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses. ND